Dick Hopkins. I'm the co-chair with my wife Paula of the Pierce County Farm Forestry. I'm a member of the Society of American Foresters, and I've had many roles in that organization. I've been training to be a field forester since I was 10 years old. I've been an educator at Green River Community College for 20 years, teaching forestry and natural resources. And currently I'm also a contract forester and educator at Lincoln Tree Farm, which is owned by Tacoma Schools. So the topic tonight is site preparation for successful reforestation. All right, so site preparation, the difference between what you see on the left-hand side of the screen with an attempt of reforestation, some cedar in tubes, versus what you see on the right side of the screen, some winter-looking, slightly chlorotic douglas-fir. So site preparation obviously can make a difference between what you see on the left and what you see on the right. Do you think the tree planters are enjoying this? I wouldn't be. So we'll start with some types of site preparation. And mechanical site preparation, scarification. This is Brian Lauk's John Deere 550. It's an older 550. Basically, John Deere replaced these with the 450 now. Has a pin on brush rake that you see in the upper left. And you can push logging slash into piles that you can deal with later. One of the problems with pushing logging slash up and exposing all that mineral soil is you provide a seed bed for unwanted weeds, especially in a situation like this where you've left an overstory of hardwoods. One of the site preparation techniques that was tried years ago, and I know of one organization that's still using these, are brush mats. So the brush mat was placed over the seedling, as you see, and it was either held down with rocks or staked down with wood, and the tree was allowed to grow. And on the right, you can see a sapling, 20 years old, with the brush mat and some dead blackberries around it. The problem with the brush mats that we found was that the mice can go through the grass, get underneath the brush mat, and then the hawks and the owls cannot get the mice. So you're providing a hiding place for the mice and voles to girdle the seedlings and kill your seedlings under that brush mat. Like I say, I know of one organization that is still trying this today. Shovel piling is a very common technique these days. The Puget Sound Air Pollution Control Agency in Washington basically put the cost of broadcast burning so high in Western Washington that we're not allowed to broadcast burn effectively or efficiently anymore. So a lot of logging slash is piled in big piles like this. And some of them are left intentionally, some of them are left by accident, and some get burned. So we like to burn the shovel piles. We do that in the wintertime. If we have to, we'll cover them with plastic and then pull the plastic off just before ignition. Another technique is to pile and pull the stumps. especially if you have laminated root rot. And the presentation I gave 2 months ago, we talked about stumping as a technique to get the laminated root rot infected stumps out of the ground and trying to reduce as much as possible the potential for future root rot in the stand. This is a photo of at Lincoln Tree Farm, where the shovel that you saw in the previous slide and another excavator was used to pull the stumps out, put them into piles, which we did not burn, and then we reforested, as you can see. The grass looks dead because we did do site preparation spraying after the initial stumping as well. So there's not a whole lot of brush out there because we used herbicides. We really do enjoy broadcast burning. This is courtesy of Patty Playfair over on the east side with her nephew Travis, proudly holding that drip torch, and he's, I don't know how many acres he's just ignited, but on the east side, they're still able to do this without high economic costs. Something that we've seen recently is piling stumps and slash along highways. And this is in violation of an RCW and a WAC of the state of Washington. You cannot have logging, slash, or debris within 100 feet of a public road or near residences or structures. So the one on the left is Highway 702 going from Highway 7 to McKenna. Perhaps some of you have seen that. The other photo on the right is off a county road, but you can pile, but don't get your piles within 100 feet of county roads, county or state roads. Once the piling and burning is completed, broadcast herbicide application should occur. And this photo is courtesy of Brian Laux. You can see the crew basically working like a planting crew. You have somebody in the lead, you have somebody following, there might be a couple of other folks following the second sprayer. And they're basically spraying side to side and often using a combination of foliar herbicide and soil active herbicide for long-term effects. But you can plant the following spring. So this would be sprayed in any time in the late spring, summer, or even in the early fall. Another photo of broadcast herbicide application, also courtesy of Brian. You can see some logging slash as well as some brush there, and the spraying crew working their way through the unit. This looks a little more challenging. Not sure if the logging slash was piled in this case. Maybe it was just left on the unit. Herbicide site preparation. You can see some blackened stumps indicating that logging slash was burned. This was actually a pile burn. And all the dead blackberries, Scotch broom, grass, and weeds. And this has been planted for about 4 years now, although this is an earlier photo. using a combination of herbicide and piling, which I mentioned. And you can see plastic on one of the, well, on most of the piles to be burned. So this would be probably a summer herbicide application and burning to occur in the fall. Don't forget your big leaf maple clumps. You need to take those out, and that could be with a foliar spray if they're not over your head, or it could be with a basal spray, as you see in this case, where the clumps are pretty good sized. Combination of Garlon and some kind of mineral oil or even diesel would work in this case. What about biomass instead of burning, or creating electricity or steam heat? I'll show you some photos of equipment that was used and created clear back in the 1970s. The United States has been very slow to catch up, and the problem we have is that we have so much wood fiber in the Pacific Northwest that it is not economical to try and get electricity or steam heat or any other product for that matter at a very efficient cost out of all of the wood fiber that we have laying on the ground. In 1972 in Sweden, and this was just before the Arab oil embargo, the government of Sweden could see a little bit of the future in what was going to happen with oil prices. And Bruks, which is a privately owned company, developed a mobile chipper, as you can see, that sat on what we would now consider a 3-axle forwarder or piece of equipment of that type. And logging slash was fed into the chipper. The chips were contained within that bin that you see where it says Bruks. And the Bruks machine went up to the landing, and it had hydraulic cylinders that lifted that bin, put the chips, and these are with bark, so they're considered a dirty chip, not a clean chip. A dirty chip into a truck, and that went to town. At the same time, in the early 70s, Sweden developed wood-fired power plants to create electricity as well as steam heat. And they heated entire towns with the steam, with the production of electricity from some of these plants. Another thing in Sweden in particular is that they do not have to have pure white paper to write on. They are just fine with brown paper like we used to have in grade school. So there's a difference in culture between how wood fiber is used. And again, this is back in 1972 in Sweden. In 1978, Puget Sound Air Pollution Control Agency in Washington, particularly Western Washington, decided that logging slash that we had previously broadcast burned was going to be charged by the ton for how much emissions were put up. I looked at what Swedish equipment was doing, as well as some Finnish and other equipment. And instead of using a Bruks type machine, took a Timberjack 520 forwarder, put a Moorbark 14-inch drum chipper on it, and as you can see, was feeding with grapples into the chipper and then blowing them out as mulch. So here's another view. We tried this at on Champion in Glenoma area to begin with, and costs on any machine are obviously going to be a lot more than site preparation, backpack, crew costs, and your machines are also slower. So you're looking at about 2 acres, 2 to 3 acres per day or per shift with any kind of a machine. And you look at the investment costs on the machine. In broadcast slash burning, we were burning at about $150 to $200 per acre in the 1970s and early 80s. This factored out to about $250 per acre. And the timber companies were looking at the lowest cost. So they're still looking at other alternatives rather than mulching or making dirty chips for pulp. So as you can see, we also sent dirty chips on a couple of occasions to Port Townsend Paper. So this is a newer Bruks machine. And these have been featured up until recently because of the Corona regulations at the Oregon Logging Conference down in Eugene. So if you've been to that conference, you may have seen some of the newer chipping mulching equipment that is on the market and available. These are not cheap. You're in the $800,000 bracket, so you have to pencil that out. John Deere back in about 2005 came out with what they called a slash bundler. So the grapple that you see hanging over the cab grabs up the logging slash. It feeds it in on the back side of the machine, as you see here, and that is compressed and wrapped, and you end up with what look like hay bales, but they're made up of logging slash. And the idea was that you then take those to your wood-fired power plant and create electricity. Maybe one of the most notable or often noted wood-fired power plants is in Anderson, California, where they still create electricity and steam. We have very few of those in Pacific Northwest. California has a few. We also have big landing chippers like the Peterson. These are fed with grapples. Some of them have debarkers on the front end, so they take the bark off. The wood is then chipped up and creates a clean chip, which makes the nice white paper that the people in the United States used to like to write on. I guess we still use white paper for computer paper. So some results. This was my machine chipping between Roslyn and Cle right next to I-90. It's now a resort, but this is what it looked like about 1990. So the DNR actually asked us to leave a few more bigger logs on the ground for wildlife. Site prep results at Lincoln Tree Farm. This unit was the stumps were pulled where we had root rot pockets. It was site prep sprayed herbicide and obviously planted. This is, about 5-6 years later. Many of you may have seen or even used brush hogs mounted on excavators. This machine is a contractor that we use on the Key Peninsula. He's out of Port Orchard, and his company is called Speedy Excavation. So you can see the tines that twirl and chew everything up. Different than a chipper, obviously, different than a hog, different concept, but here's what it looks like. An example before and the same site afterwards. So he chomped through all of that brush that you see there and even took down a couple of maples, and it's ready to plant. You might want to do site preparation spray on top of that. A unit that Paula and I sprayed today, this morning. This was mulched by Speedy Excavation about 6 weeks ago. All those green things you see are bracken fern. It has not been planted yet. So it was full of Scotch broom and Himalayan and evergreen blackberry. And we just moseyed right along and didn't have to worry about fighting through the brush as we sprayed this morning. So this will be planted this coming winter. You may have seen front end mulching equipment. Several outfits like Integrated Resource Management out of Oregon have equipment like this, where basically a bobcat type machine with a front rotary apparatus that chews up the logging slash in front of it. One thing you want to be careful with in any kind of mechanical operation is do not find an abandoned railroad iron or wire, any kind of metal. It really hurts your production. Here's an example of site preparation results, again at Lincoln Tree Farm. This was a unit that had not been treated. It was allowed to grow. We brought an excavator in, we pulled the brush, we piled the brush, burned it, and then herbicide sprayed, and as you can see, planted. So you can see the tracks of the excavator from the initial operation. And anytime you bring in a machine, you're not looking at $40 or $50 an acre. You're running your costs up, but remember those first couple of slides that I showed you. Do you want successful reforestation or do you want a mess? Again, Lincoln Tree Farm, we have cedar inside of tubes that we maintain once a year or more, pulling them up to keep the tops of the tubes above the leaders of the cedar so the elk don't eat them. And you can see piles in the back that have plastic on them that were burned the fall, the fall after planting. Well, sometimes we plant a unit right up to about 20 feet from a pile, and then we'll burn the piles and then come back and fill plant where the piles were. We often do that as a matter of fact. So as I said, the costs vary greatly and no two units are the same. So you might have $40 or $50 an acre cost if you're doing the brush mats, or you're only treating big leaf maple clumps. If you are doing just herbicide site preparation with a crew, backpack spraying, you might be $125 an acre. I didn't show helicopter spraying. Typically, we don't get that advantage because our units are too small. But once you bring in a machine, they may only get 2 acres per day, and you may have $1,000 per day cost in that contractor. So you're looking at perhaps $500 per acre. But again, here's a unit that we had 2 machines on. We pulled the stumps, we site prep sprayed, and we think we have a good investment here. Thank you very much.
Hey, Dick, this is Brian. I have a comment.
Yes.
I'm always amazed at what a difference you get when you do any kind of a site prep, but in this case, a chemical site prep on different slopes. You can go into a unit and do everything the same, but a north slope will have vegetation that the south slope doesn't have, or the reverse. And so the comment is you really have to go back after you do any kind of treatment and look at the job, because it may be that 3 months later you'll have to go in with some kind of a follow-up hand spray or something like that.
Yeah, that's correct. And even your soil texture makes a difference. If you have clay soils versus sandy soils, you've got to be careful if you're using soil active herbicides as to the amount, or you can not have the results you want, or you could really cook everything. Thank you, Brian. Okay, so Jim's asking, can we spray just after scarification, or do we need to wait for greening of weeds? I prefer to wait a little bit after scarification. And the reason for that is we use a combination of foliar, such as Garlon or glyphosate, with our soil active herbicide. We get a better result than just using soil active alone. So we like to wait, just like the one slide I showed where Darren had mulched the Scotch broom and blackberries. We waited 6 weeks, and now we're spraying.
Dick, Jim DeWild, once again, I have a different question.
Yes.
So how realistic is it for an individual to do their own spraying versus hiring a crew on, say, a 10 or a 15 acre piece that's been cleared?
It's entirely possible and feasible. Brian and I would ask you how your knees are. And you need to know, you have to have some experience, I think, with herbicide use, or you can not get the results that you want. So given those factors, yeah, you could easily do 15 acres, and depending on your time frame, do a couple of hours a day, or try and knock it out in 2 days.
Good, thank you.
Speak now. Dick, I would add a comment to that for Jim, and that is there's really 2 kinds of spraying that a small landowner can do. One of them is called waving wand. It's a broadcast spray. And rather than go into a lot of details, you need to get somebody to show you how to do it. But you can basically do a 20 to 30 foot wide swath and then ribbon your way down and then follow your ribbons back. So you broadcast spray it. The other is spot spray. And there you're just going in with a normal nozzle and kind of a cone shaped, or there's several different ways of doing it, but you can come up and put a circle around the tree, pointing the nozzle away from the tree, or you could bracket the tree with a series of parallel spray swaths. But both of them work very well, and they're something the small landowner can and should do.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, and I would add that you need that flagging, because you will get lost without a flag line to follow your way back. You'll either miss places or you'll double spray places. So even if you're spot spraying, use flagging so you keep track of exactly where you are.
And I'd add a comment to what Dick is saying, that if you're trying to put out, for instance, a half a gallon of chemical per acre, and you're doing a waving wand and it's going out at that rate, every place that you have an overlap now has chemical at 1 gallon per acre. And so you may end up
Right.
killing the tree that's there. So it's critical that you know a few things. And the other thing is you need to get your pesticide license. And when you go through that course, you'll learn a lot of additional information.
It is technically possible, legally possible, for landowners to spray their own land without the license, but I and others do not recommend you do that. You need the education before you try to do it yourself. On the Farm Forestry website, there are, I think, 13 chapters now on that Brian has put together on forest management applications. So thank you, everyone, for attending, and take a look at the Farm Forestry information that's available to you for free, and go out and practice.